Hey. So I'm not sure how much of this game I got left. I found Gran had a secret lair. And also that she's supposed to be dead. And interrogated some dude. But now he's escaped from the chair apparently.
As Luca climbed the final stair, the emotion of the day dragged heavily on him. With each consecutive step, his legs weakened. His stride began to falter. He tried to grab for the railing to steady himself. Something was wrong. Luca groaned and tried to move. His limbs might as well have been bolted to the ground. Through numb lips, he mumbled just before falling asleep. Chapter 9. A speech to end all speeches.
Dang, chapter 9 is the furthest I've got.
Luca awoke to find himself face down in bed. He moaned into his pillow. Why would Gran drug him? Or rather, why was she trying to drug Mr. Nuncreed? Shaking the questions from his woozy head, Luca snapped back to the matter at hand.
I still have flight on this path. And chill on this one. I went with hard.
Augustus Valentine nervously wiped his brow. Gus cleared his throat and awkwardly loosened his tie. William Kerr bounded on the stage with the energy of a preacher at a big tent revival. He gave Gus a hearty slap on the back and motioned him off the stage. Mr. Kerr pulled a big stack of note cards out from his vest. Mr. Kerr took a moment to survey the crowd. He wiped away a single tear. He thumped the podium to emphasize each word. Mr. Kerr nodded confidently, biting his lip. The crowd was silent, in rapt attention. Mr. Kerr methodically made eye contact with each section of the crowd. His voice began to build to a crescendo. The crowd began to look around nervously. Mr. Kerr quickly flicked through his note cards. He raised his hands up to the heavens. At that moment, a merciless wall of impossibly cold air ripped through the crowd, instantly freezing everyone and everything it touched.
So. I think Gran has something to do with everything freezing. This happened in another ending too.
For a man like William Kerr, this was a fitting way for things to end. On a stage, with an entire town frozen in rapt attention for the rest of time. There's that ice again! Whenever I think we're getting close, it comes along and ruins everything! Maybe we should just quit? Maybe you should just close the book, walk away, and never think of me again. No, I don't mean that. We got a little closer this time. We just need to try again. Please. They'd run the classic good cop, chill cop interrogation. Luca walked calmly to the light switch, flicking it off and on a few times. Mr. Tolliver shook his head, gathering his wits. He looked over to find Luca, who returned a calming grin. Rollo and Beck emerged from hiding to give a timid wave. Luca glanced over to Rollo and Beck, who replied with skeptical looks. Mr. Tolliver exhaled with disappointment. Luca gestured to the corner. Luca looked again to Rollo and Beck. This time they shrugged. Luca began to slowly loosen the bindings. Mr. Tolliver gently rubbed his wrists. He edged imperceptibly toward the stairs as he spoke. Before the kids had even noticed his movement, Mr. Tolliver was at the light switch. He punctuated his final words by flicking the switch and rushing up the stairs. Beck darted to the wall and turned back on the lights. It was too late. Rollo confirmed what they all heard. Mr. Tolliver's muffled voice came from behind the door. They looked bewildered at each other. They heard the staccato thump of quick steps exiting the house. The kids looked down in resignation. This isn't how it goes in Hank Atomic. For some reason, they'd always assumed it was up to them to save their town. Luca opened his mouth, hoping to conjure some magical words to make this right. Only a hollow croak escaped. The end. Well, we certainly aren't going to find a grand resolution to our tale locked in a basement. Back to the drawing board. They'd run the classic good cop, sly cop interrogation. Luca and Rollo ducked behind a barrel, leaving Beck to her task. With a few crisp snaps, she roused Mr. Tolliver. Mr. Tolliver looked down and shifted a bit, testing his restraints. Beck caught herself before letting the surprise manifest on her face. She'd already gotten him to reveal his relation to Gran. This was going to be easy. Mr. Tolliver wriggled a bit in his restraints. Beck quickly removed the ropes. Mr. Tolliver rubbed the growing knot on his forehead. twirled her hand, as if to prompt Mr. Tolliver to finish her thought.
LMFAO hiatus. Iaceus.
Beck shook her head and clicked her tongue. Mr. Tolliver let out an amused huff in agreement. Beck was on a roll now, playing Mr. Tolliver like a fiddle.
The explosives are to destroy the source. And whatever the source is, destroying it freezes everything.
Heading for the stairs, Mr. Tolliver hesitated and turned to Beck with a puzzled look. She grinned and gave him a peppy wave. With a shrug, he continued up the stairs, whistling a jaunty tune.
I mean, he wasn't manipulated by Luca. Beck is just too good.
Beck blinked slowly in disappointment. She turned to the table and began tearing small scraps of paper. Beck marked each scrap of paper and leaned back. Luca and Beck looked at Rollo with amazement.
He is pretty dumb though, you right.
Gus looked around nervously.
That person's still reading.
Solomon stood proudly at the entrance to the drugstore, holding a brown bag overflowing with black licorice. Solomon shoveled a surprising amount of licorice into his mouth.
They said they installed phone booths all over town, but I swear that's the only one.
Beck cupped her hands on the glass to peek inside. Beck flung open the door and they all squeezed in. Luca cracked his knuckles and entered the letters into the keypad. The inside of the phone booth dropped loose from its shell. Without even the space to panic, they closed their eyes, held their breath, and accepted their fate. Suddenly, the chaotic descent slowed to an effortless landing. It was unclear where they ended up, but at least it was solid ground. The air was stagnant and smelled vaguely of chlorine. Rollo's hands hovered over the field of blinking buttons. Joseph waited for a moment in silence. He gestured toward the strange tubes. Nuncreed let out a growl of a sigh. He shook his head wistfully. Nuncreed took a menacing step towards the children. Luca began to... The color drained from Nuncreed's face. Nuncreed grabbed Luca by the shoulders. His eyes were frantic. A jolt of realization struck Mr. Nuncreed. Chapter 8. The Cold, Hard Truth. Beck leapt up, allowing the suction to yank her into the dark. Dimness eclipsed around her like the shutter of a camera as she seemed to cover great distance in mere moments. Her only points of reference were glints of upcoming turns, which approached with frightening speed, only to carom her gracefully along. She heard the tinny, distant echoes of Rollo's glee. Once she stopped fighting against it, the ride was impossibly smooth. Then, all of a sudden, as if minutes had passed in an instant, light blazed into view. A burst of wintry air snuffed across her face, and she was flung out into the cold.
There's 2 beacon pines. So this is the original beacon pines.
As they rounded the corner to the frozen town square, they spotted Mr. Nuncreed inching cautiously toward a pit at its center. He held his arms out gingerly, as if approaching a beast in the wild. Upon closing the distance, Luca recognized what Nuncreed was after. Gran stood confidently at the edge, one arm outstretched over the abyss. Nearby, a wheelbarrow had been emptied out. She held a lit torch, which flickered in the bitter wind. Mr. Nuncreed turned back toward the kids, desperation in his eyes. Rollo and Beck held steadfast in awe. Luca approached closer. Mr. Nuncreed spun back toward Gran, his voice growing louder. Mr. Nuncreed winced with anguish. His voice hardened. They both now yelled, not to each other, but at fate itself, making their peace with long-held burdens. The wind howled with encouragement. They menaced at each other, both catching their breath. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Amid a blur of emotions and memories, Luca's mind flooded with questions. The wind calmed, as if to give him the stage. And in the stillness, he began to weep. It was all just too much. Falling to his knees, Luca whimpered softly. The tears crystallized as they hit the snow. Gran stared at Luca for a moment with warm sympathy, remembering why this was all necessary. She stiffened up and brandished the torch at Mr. Nuncreed. Ignoring his final plea, Gran flung the torch into the deep darkness. She smiled and exhaled in relief. Mr. Nuncreed moaned in resignation. The torch echoed as it ricocheted down the hole, punctuated with a thunderous thud. Before Gran could finish, the ground shook her to silence. Gran only had time to her attempt to shield him, an honorable but trifling act. unflinching love, pitted against an unthinking horror. There was no contest. Her warm embrace froze in an instant. That is where they remain, fixed in place, forever. And so, our story ends on this melancholy scene. In a town brought low by its secrets, sits the frozen statues of a misguided band of meddlers.
What about Half-Life 2?
The end. Well, that was dire. On the bright side, we finally figured out where all the ice is coming from. Now, we just need to find a way to deal with a mystic, unfathomable force of nature. Luca drew himself up and decided to take the only option they had left. Flight. He squinted down the barrel of the mission control defense cannon, aiming it through an opening in the dense tree branches. He looked up with surprise as it struck true and taut. Luca and Iggy winced as they sprinted through the thicket. The branches clawed at them, reluctant to give passage. After what felt like a marathon, Luca stopped in his tracks as they reached the clearing. What the? That was all he was able to say before Iggy slammed into his back. The boys tumbled down a steep decline and crashed with a wheezing thud on a surface as hard as ice. In fact, it was ice. Chapter 5. Signs. They stood silently, catching their breath. The sky was like sapphire. With each breath, a plume of steam escaped from Luca's lungs. Let's keep moving. Luca pulled Iggy to his feet as they gazed across a snowy terrain.
Oh, I'm back here. But in a different route. Yeah, there's different branches.
Luca had almost forgotten the walkie-talkie he was carrying. Luca looked at Iggy with hesitation. With a resigned sigh, Luca responded. Luca winced, shoving the walkie-talkie back into his pocket.
Oh, I get the joke you were making now.
The boys stared in disbelief at the sign that now clearly read, "Welcome to Beacon Pines." The fencing listened, each chain link encapsulated with a translucent layer of ice. Looking down at the frozen stream, Luca could faintly see a school of minnows encased in the ice.
Alright, see ya, thanks for the lurk.
The crunching of footsteps trailing Luca went hush. He looked back to see Iggy's face twisted with confusion. Luca peered upward at the darkening sky. He let out a long, foggy breath. Faintly, Iggy began to cry. Seeing Iggy in such a pathetic state gave Luca a sense of compassion and more than a little guilt. Luca allowed himself to collapse next to Iggy. The boys huddled together for warmth and comfort. If not for exhaustion, their minds would be racing, trying to make sense of the events of the day. As it was, all they had energy for was to sit in silence, numb. Iggy motioned sarcastically to his half-deformed face. Iggy shrugged. Iggy now wept openly. He wiped his nose with a sleeve. Luca gave a warm chuckle. Iggy cleared his throat as he wiped his eyes. Iggy arched into a wide yawn. Luca's eyelids began to slowly drift shut. That's all Luca could whisper before succumbing to sleep. Iggy snuggled in some more. The house smelled of warm bread. Luca was playing with toy blocks on the living room rug. He looked up to see his parents on the couch. His mother held his father's head in her lap. She idly stroked his hair while humming a song. A voice behind Luca spoke. "This is how you remember them, huh?" Luca turned to see his own face, the doppelganger from his dreams. still clad in a yellow hazmat suit, still carrying a look of disdain behind empty eyes. Aww, look at this perfectly cozy scene. You know it wasn't really like this. The figure picked up a toy block and inspected it. It's amazing the facades that one can build given the right materials. Not that I blame us. These are a child's memories, all warm and fuzzy. You don't remember, do you? Lucas snatched the block from the figure's yellow-gloved hand. Remember what? The doppelganger pointed to the couch. The last day we saw him alive. The day he chose to abandon us. Luca turned to look at his father, still lounging on the couch. That's not true. He didn't abandon us. The doppelganger waved his hand dismissively. Everything is true here. It's just a matter of what we choose to see. Well, let me show you. The world flickered and pulsed. Luca was sitting next to his bed, listening to his heartbeat with one of his dad's stethoscopes. The doppelganger limped into the room. No, we both know that's not how this went. He grabbed Luca's hand and guided the stethoscope to the floor. Luca heard muffled shouting, brought close by the stethoscope. It was his parents, fighting. Do you remember what we did next? Luca gave a slow nod and crept down the hall to peek through the banister. He could see the outline of his mother at the bottom of the stairs. Damn it, Walt. We can't afford to get involved in this. She was scared. His father stepped forward. What am I supposed to do? Just watch? There's a sickness in this town, and we both know who's behind it. I swore an oath to help people. I won't turn my back on them. Luca's mother grabbed Walt. She was crying, pleading. I can't lose you. Walt calmly removed Eleanor's hand from his shoulder. What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. I could never live with myself if I let Sharper get away with this. Eleanor raised her voice. Spare me your bullshit platitudes. What about our son? Luca flinched, dropping the stethoscope down the stairs. Walt turned with a panicked smile. Luca, is that you, buddy? With tears in his eyes, Luca descended the stair. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Walt dropped to a knee to meet Luca eye to eye. Nothing, buckaroo. Your mom and I just got a little overexcited is all. Luca placed the stethoscope against his father's chest. His heart was racing. It sounded like you were going somewhere? Walt gently removed the device from Luca's ears. Listen to me, Luca. I have some business to take care of. I'll be back in time to tuck you in. Luca hugged his father tightly. Promise? Walt stood up and walked to the door. He glanced over his shoulder. I promise. With a wink and a grin, he put on his hat and strode out into the evening sun. A figure approached soundlessly from the foggy snowfall. It stood above them, lingering in contemplation. Slowly raising one hand above Iggy, it snapped out 2 brisk raps on his head. From a deep slumber, Iggy sprang up defensively. Whether it was the calming presence or the recognition that he was not in danger, Iggy felt his clenched fists lower. Luca looked up, gradually remembering his whereabouts. The figure exhaled a cloud of warm vapor. When it came to complete strangers, Iggy had trouble cobbling together an insult. Iggy huffed with gratification. Nat began to turn away indifferently. Iggy turned sharply and began to stomp off. Realizing he'd worn their patience then, Nat relented. Luca and Iggy turned around with hope in their eyes. Nat took a deep breath in. Nat exhaled slowly, then snapped his fingers. For a brief moment, Luca and Iggy let themselves believe that some great magic was about to unfold, until they opened their eyes and found themselves in the exact same place, cold and disheartened. Nat narrowed his eyes, furrowed his brow, and uttered. Luca began to laugh uncomfortably. He looked down at his feet. His eyes darted back and forth in contemplation. With a sudden pain, a thought struck him. He sprinted off into the pale distance. As Iggy turned to follow, Nat called out. Chapter 6. The Source. Nat expressed his sympathy with a shrug and sauntered off as unassumingly as he'd arrived. He'd given Luca and Iggy what they needed, and nothing more. As Luca sprinted across the snow, the events of the past few days became clearer, pieces to a larger puzzle. Rollo said he was underground somewhere, captured. Mr. Kerr tried to cover it up with lies. The clipboards were hell-bent on capturing Iggy. It all seemed to point to Perennial Harvest, but right now, there was one thing that Luca needed to know. Luca stopped dead in his tracks. The tree was gone, uprooted and moved, leaving a raw gash in the earth. He dropped to his knees and dug wildly at the cold snow. His numb hands hit something hard, a headstone. A dry whisper escaped Luca's lips. There was no reply, just snow-covered silence. Iggy finally noticed the tears welling in Luca's eyes and the snow-covered grave. Suddenly, they heard the crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow. He bent down to scoop up a snowball and lobbed it playfully. Luca stuttered through heaving sobs. Iggy gave Luca a solid smack on the back of his head. Luca wiped his eyes with a sleeve. Iggy flashed a mischievous smile and cracked his knuckles. Iggy and Luca shared a skeptical look. Iggy darted behind a large pine and began digging furiously. He emerged holding a shoebox with a crude skull painted on its lid. Luca rolled his eyes with realization. Iggy stifled a chuckle. Iggy triumphantly raised the shoebox.
So now we're gonna be the ones to cause the big freeze.
Luca and Iggy inched up to the edge of the hole with bewilderment in their eyes. Arctic air breathed out of the cavern in heaving gusts. Mr. Kerr gazed down the abyss in contemplation. Kerr scratched the back of his head. His face contorted into a saccharine grin. Kerr snapped his fingers. Iggy turned to Luca with a sly glance. Iggy waved the box into the air, threatening to drop it down the hole. plucked a single bottle rocket from the box and held it up with reverence. After a long pause, Mr. Kerr flung up his hand with frustration. Mr. Kerr sighed into the frigid air. With a nonchalant flick, Eggy tossed the firework into the hole. With a growl, Kerr leapt at Iggy, crashing through Luca. Iggy tried to twist away, but in the struggle they both tumbled over the side. Luca dove forward, bracing Iggy's hand just before it slipped. His grip was made precarious by the cold, wet snow. He could see Kerr further down, clinging to Iggy's coat. Mr. Kerr gasped with insult. With a wild look in his eye, Mr. Kerr began to hum a proud melody. Luca's hand began to cramp. His voice began to crack. Luca felt Iggy loosen his grasp. Every muscle in Luca's body burned. Luca felt his hand slipping. A calm settled over Iggy's face. Iggy's voice was colder than the bitter air billowing from the chasm. Luca had no choice but to accept Iggy's request. With a quiet blink, Luca watched a teardrop sail down into the howling void. As his fingers slowly gave up, he met eyes with Iggy. The two silhouettes were swallowed by darkness. We have some idea what that would look like. fierce twinkle flashed in Nat's eyes.
Hey Adam.
With a chuckle, Nat turned and walked west. Dumbfounded, Luca followed behind him, trudging through the snow, every step taking him further away from everyone and everything he knew, and closer to destiny. To be continued in Beacon Pines, Pines Harder. Revenge served cold. Second. Wait, that's it? This ends with a crummy cliffhanger just when it was getting good?
Wait, what?
I was even starting to like Iggy. No way. I refuse to be associated with some never-ending parade of sequels. Let's go back and find something more definitive. Luca had no choice but to refuse Iggy's request. He tightened his grip and reached for the walkie-talkie in his pocket. A wild delight crept onto Mr. Kerr's face. That's a good lad. Now, radio for help. Iggy begged Luca with his eyes one last time, but Luca pressed the button and called out, We need help. Mr. Kerr is in danger.
That actually seemed like a not so bad ending though. We stopped the big freeze from happening.
It wasn't long before they were once again surrounded by clipboards. Mr. Kerr sighed with relieved frustration. There you are. You really are a worthless lot, aren't you? Mirror. Now, a clipboard dutifully produced an ornate ivory hand mirror, and Mr. Kerr began preening his tousled hair. Ah, that's better. Mr. Van Horn, I applaud your sharp thinking under duress. I'll put in a good word for you with the founder. Take them away. A swarm of hands overpowered Luca. The last thing he saw before a cloth bag was pulled over his head was the defeated look on Iggy's face. The end. I think this was one of those times where doing the right thing was the wrong thing. And in the stillness, he began to hum. After the death of his father, Luca had trouble sleeping. Each night, his mother would sit at the foot of his bed and hum a gentle melody. It was the only thing that could calm his mind, the only thing that, however briefly, could make it all seem okay. That melody pervaded every memory Luca had of his mother. Shivering in the raw snow, he began to hum it out loud. Gran lowered the torch, listening closely.
Maybe Nat is Luca's mom but younger. Or Gran is Luca's mom but older by the goop stuff.
As recognition slowly set in, her heart sank. Those countless nights of consolation, the incomparable loss they shared together. She let the torch fall to the snow and sizzle out. A few steps toward Luca was all she could bear before dropping to the snow herself. Through a flood of tears, she began to hum along, note for note.
Gran is actually Luca's mom.
Luca lifted his head in astonishment. The last time he heard that melody was the last night he saw his mother. Luca blinked through blurry, watery eyes, trying to see more clearly. He could just make out the impression of a familiar face. He peered across the snowscape at the woman on her knees. Something about her was undeniably his mother, only smaller, older, changed. Luca sprinted as fast as he could toward his mother. They held each other close, and the cold retreated from their bodies. Eleanor looked down at Luca, tightening her embrace in an appeal for forgiveness. Joseph slumped into the cold, wet snow. For the first time in a long time, her voice felt like her own again. Luca gazed down at Nuncreed with pity. He looked small. Joseph stared into the snow, as if searching it for answers. Chapter 9. The Devil You Know. 7 months ago, Eleanor Van Horn crept down the maze of sterile hallways under Perennial Harvest. She stopped in front of the large steel door marked Deep Engineering. No turning back now. She raised a trembling hand. The stolen keycard worked as promised, and the door buzzed open with mechanical efficiency. She was immediately hit with the smell of disinfectant. It was some sort of laboratory. In one corner was a desk covered in papers. Across the room stood a tall metal pod with hoses protruding from its base. She rushed to the desk and began shifting through the piles of papers. They were experiment reports on something called Tempus Liquamen. There were dozens of them. Every one stamped failed. Eleanor heard the sharp echo of footsteps approaching. She was out of time. Her eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on the strange pod. Muttering a curse under her breath, she dashed over and dove inside. Mr. Kerr addressed the crowd with a sarcastic tone. Whispers filtered through the crowd. moment dragged on Joseph Nuncrete's face. He paused for a moment, plucking a piece of fuzz from his sweater and discarding it to the ground. Kerr gave a bow of deference. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Solomon pulled a glass vial from his pocket. In one smooth motion, he downed its contents. A triumphant smile grew across Solomon's lips. His body and face began to contort and expand as he disappeared into a belching green mist. A hushed horror gripped the crowd. This is a story about change. Sharper examined his new hands.
I was suspicious about the kid, but I didn't think he was Sharper.
Sharper choked out a crude squawk of a laugh. Frustrated grumbles sprinkled through the crowd. William Kerr gave a subtle nod to the clipboards. A helpless quiet settled over the crowd. Sharper addressed the crowd with indignant pride. He'd planned this moment for so long that now, at the deed's fruition, it almost felt frivolous. Mr. Kerr flourished a preposterously elaborate bow. Sharper coughed up one final laugh and cracked his knuckles. And so, Sharper set about remaking the town in his own image. The fertilizer factory soon reopened for business. Sales rose steadily as more and more farmers across the countryside began to swear by its miraculous properties. Beacon Pines became famous, a secretive town that, for the right price, shared its gifts with all. Gifts that became more and more necessary in a world where winters grew longer and longer. The end. This is wrong, but things are becoming clearer now. You can feel it, right? We can't let Sharper win. He might just be the key to this whole thing. Let's see. There was a malice lurking behind those eyes, like a trap ready to spring. Luca felt the weight of Nuncreed's hand on his shoulder.
Guns don't exist in this game, IG. Everyone's dead from crazy stuff like science experiments.
Something wasn't right. He didn't know why, but something was telling Luca to get out of there. Luca twisted free of Nuncreed's grasp. The two scurried off, eagerly formulating a plan.
So who TF is that other dog? The one talking to Solomon. Who we now know is Sharper. I've never seen that character before. But they must be important if they're talking to Sharper.
Luca wrapped a twig of thyme around the hook. Some fish have refined taste. Luca gently put first. He aired a long holler into the woods. Luca felt his eyes getting heavy and plopped into the beanbag. He conceded to its lumpy embrace. Once again, Luca found himself in a vast black expanse. This time, he knew exactly where to go. He took a single confident step forward. The world flickered and pulsed. He found himself standing in front of the frigid air of a blazing campfire. The sort, he plopped down cross-legged and gazed into the cold flame, waiting. Soon enough, the fire began to die out, popping sporadically, until all that was left was a single ember. Luca stood up and dusted himself off. He plucked the glowing ember from the cold ash, examined it, and slid it into his pocket, a keepsake. The voice of his father spoke behind him. "You made me proud, Buckaroo." Luca turned to face him. "Dad, what is this place?" A warm grin grew across his father's face. "A place where everything that has been and everything that could be all wait together." Luca found himself staring at his father's face, trying as hard as he could to memorize every single detail. "Wait? For what?" Another voice spoke out as Luca's doppelganger stepped forward. "That's up to you." Without knowing why, Luca began to weep. Is any of this real? Are you real?" Luca's father bent down to smudge away a tear. "Of course, I'm as real as the part of you that misses me." Luca turned to look at the older version of himself. "And you?" The doppelganger choked back tears. "I'm as real as the part of you that's angry he's gone." Does that make sense? Through his tears, Luca laughed. "I think so." His father pulled him in for an embrace. "Time to go, Buckaroo." Luca was startled from his dream by a banging on the floor. A commanding voice rumbled from below. Just as Luca sprang to lock the entry hatch, the door knocked open. Chapter 5. Dangers big and small. Luca stumbled back. He heard the rope ladder creak under significant weight. Keeping his eyes fixed on the hatch, he inched backward to the balcony. As his hand grasped the door handle, Luca froze. A large figure clumsily wriggled up through the hole. large figure cocked its head inquisitively.
WTF, Rollo got older.
Luca's jaw dropped.
From the Tempest goo or what have.
He peered more closely at the man standing in front of him. Something about him was undeniably Rollo, only bigger, older, changed.
Why would they let Rollo out?
Rollo proudly presented his hands to Luca. Luca moved to the side and pointed Rollo to his reflection in the balcony window. His hands shot up to his face.
Like licorice. And Solomon likes licorice.
Rollo shadowboxed a few jabs. With a yelp, Rollo dove behind Luca. She shot a nervous glance at Rollo. Beck's eyes narrowed. Ilona tried to put on a smile. She sighed. after a moment, looked down at Beck sympathetically.
Oh hey Avery, what's up? Avery is another cool streamer, I'll give you a shout out. And yeah, the art in this game is really good. Thanks for the follow.
She flashed a sly grin and tousled Beck's hair. Luca gave Rollo a quick elbow to the ribs.
Who was the last deep engineering researcher, I wonder?
Beck flicked a large sheet of paper out of her pocket and slammed it on the floor. Rollo started to wiggle with excitement. Chapter 6. The Heist. They spent the night's end huddled around that small map, formulating a plan to infiltrate the headquarters of Perennial Harvest.
This is like the sixth chapter 6.
It would be no small feat. A modern facility equipped with all manner of technology. Not to mention the swarm of clipboards that would most certainly be scattered throughout. By the time the sun began to peek through the car window used as a makeshift balcony door, all were in agreement. This could just work. The final day before the festival would be used to prepare. They'd need to pool every resource at their disposal, pull every favor with a thread, even enlist some unsavory characters around town with important tasks only they were suited for. Luckily, there was enough ill will and mistrust toward Perennial Harvest that alliances could be found at a bargain. Luca, Beck, and Rollo rubbed their eyes as they exited the treehouse. They hadn't slept at all that night. There was no time. The festival was to begin in one day, and they each had their assignments. He waved vaguely at Rollo's sizable figure. Beck snorted an involuntary giggle. They each looked at each other with sleepy confidence and nodded.
So it's all coming together. Iggy from the other route. Where is everyone? Everyone. It's so empty. Yeah, the festival is tomorrow. Basically, it's like a choose your own adventure. With split timelines. This is like the graph of everything. And the options I could have taken.
Jeff wheezed out a long snicker. The joy in Jeff's face drained instantly. Looking into the sullen eyes of his would-be accomplice, Luca blurted out the first word that came to mind. Luca wasn't ready to give up so easily. He shouted out again. Jeff's brow perked up. Sensing some traction, Luca carried on with vigor. Jeff's scowl faded with a sigh.
Good thing I had the right charm, lol.
One good stomp of the foot was all Jeff needed to drive his point home. Luca offered out his open hand to seal the deal. With a firm and dusty grip, Jeff reciprocated. Iggy raised an eyebrow suspiciously. Iggy gave a reluctant shrug. Luca knew they'd need Iggy and Tish to pull this off. He tried again. Iggy gave a reluctant shrug. Iggy considered the point. A wild-eyed grin spread across Iggy's face. Iggy glanced over to Tish, who nodded in agreement. With a quick nod, Luca was off. Iggy gazed up at Tish with a smile. A single tear ran down Tish's cheek. Chapter 7.
Wow, Tish spoke.
A good heist requires preparation. and thorough preparation takes time, something they had precious little of. So far, everything was in order. Jeff, Iggy, and Tish all agreed to do their part. Beck radioed Luca that night with a simple and covert message. "We're locked and loaded on my end." And Rollo, after a lengthy confession, managed to persuade Roxy and Fitz to help. He stowed away in mission control for the night to avoid attracting attention. Rollo, being uniquely suited for the role, would be the first to breach Perennial Harvest. The outfit provided by Jeff wasn't perfect, but a convincing disguise is 10% wardrobe, 90% confidence. Rollo took a few vigorous breaths and shook out his arms. He had to think quick. Rollo sighed, adjusting his tool belt. With a stroke of his mustache, Rollo proceeded into the Perennial Harvest headquarters. He stammered and flipped through the pages of his clipboard. Rollo interrupted with urgency in his voice. Rollo panicked. The distraction was enough for Rollo to regain his confidence. The clipboard fumbled around in a frenzy.
This place is very empty. But at least there's a water cooler. Thank you for the hydrate, LOL. Who built this office?
Solomon stopped in his tracks. A veneer of confusion flashed across Solomon's face. His words rushed out dramatically. Solomon's facade briefly faltered. Luca happened to notice a plaque above the door. Luca tried the handle. Solomon leaned forward to examine the mechanism. Luca smiled and looked at his watch. She mimed a quick hat tip and ambled off with a whistle. The light on the keypad changed from red to green. Luca switched on his walkie-talkie. On the computer screen, a green cursor blinked in a password field. Luca pecked out his best guess: underground secrets. The screen blinked to life. Columns of green numbers glowed on a black background. Solomon's jaw clenched into a half smile. Luca quickly scanned the columns for number 24601. Once again, Luca scrutinized the numbers on the screen. In that moment of distraction, Solomon reached forward and pressed a large red button. He quickly skimmed the screen with his finger.
We already know that Solomon is secretly the founder.
Mr. Kerr approached with a sneer and spoke into his walkie-talkie. With self-satisfaction, he called into the hallway. examine his teeth. Nellie sighed. Solomon muttered inaudibly.
LOL, I'm curious how this is gonna go. Solomon is literally the founder.
With a subtle, quivering lip, a smile crawled across Solomon's face. Solomon once again muttered under his breath. Luca tugged on each of the cabinets. Luca held his hand up to the ashtray. They heard the trampling of frantic footsteps from the hallway. Her eyes searched the floor in thought. Solomon watched eagerly, waiting for the flicker of epiphany. With a sickened look, she peered into his soul. Solomon clapped with genuine delight. Solomon glanced down, examining his youthful form. Kerr presented it with a theatrical twirl of the hand. Before he could finish, Rollo snatched the vial from Kerr's palm. Rollo casually tossed the vial to Luca. Luca jiggled the vial mockingly. She held it tightly behind her back. Solomon sighed, speaking in crisp, measured syllables. He pursed his lips with feigned sincerity. A deep uncertainty washed over Beck. She looked to Nellie shakily. With a dispirited nod, Nellie sighed in defeat. Beck slowly approached Solomon. With apprehension, Beck conceded. Solomon pocketed the vial and brushed off his shoulder with a sharp flick. The blood drained from Kerr's face. Solomon shook his head with gratification. A muffled applause resonated faintly through the walls.
If only my knowledge transferred between paths.
Nellie was staring at the floor, deep in thought. Nellie was staring at the floor, deep in thought.
LOL, if only.
The color dropped from Luca's face. Luca was overwhelmed with emotion. A sudden explosion sounded from the hull. Chapter 8. Comeuppance. Ears still ringing, Gran picked herself up off the ground. Through the dust and smoke, she looked over to see Mrs. Fratelli helping Hiram Tolliver to his feet. She'd had to beg, borrow, and steal to acquire those explosives. How many nights had she spent visualizing how she'd use them to make things right? And now, her one shot at destroying the source, that damned hole that swallowed so much of her life, was gone. Traded for this jagged hole in a wall and a foolhardy shot at rescuing Rollo. With Fratelli and Tolliver at her side, she stepped through. It was a strange feeling. The last time she'd stalked this maze of hallways, it was in a different body. They quickly rounded a corner to find a group of clipboards guarding a door. Something worth guarding is probably something worth seeing. She leapt forward, brandishing her cane. If her last chance at vengeance for things lost was truly gone, she would just have to fight to keep what she still had. They made their way out from deep within Perennial Harvest, just as Solomon finished up his speech. Solomon pulled a glass vial from his pocket. In one smooth motion, he downed its contents. A triumphant smile grew across Solomon's lips. With a mischievous look, Beck elbowed Luca. Remember when I had the vial behind my back? I might have tweaked his wonder potion with a little malice. His body and face began to contort and expand as he disappeared into a belching green mist. The crowd gazed in stunned silence at the now empty stage. The quiet was broken when William Kerr sprinted off stage and into the distance. He was never seen around Beacon Pines, or anywhere else for that matter, again. Watching the silhouette of Kerr disappear over the horizon, Luca began to laugh. First, a low chuckle that became uncontrolled, heaving laughter. Through his tears, he was vaguely aware that the crowd had begun to laugh with him. The end. That was unexpected. Perhaps a bit of an absurd ending for my taste, but who am I to say? I'm only writing the damn thing. I might have tweaked tweaked his wonder potion with a little junk.
I'm picking what I think is the correct option last.
His body and face began to contort and expand as he disappeared into a belching green mist. As the last of what was once Sharper Valentine wafted into the air, the crowd began to disperse, still numb from what they had just observed. Sharper Valentine was gone for good. His end would be a new beginning for Beacon Pines, a new chance to let go of the things they had lost and grab hold of a new future. Well, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a bit gratifying. If that feels to you like a good note to end on, I won't stand in your way. I might have tweaked his wonder potion with a little change. His body and face began to contort and expand as he disappeared into a belching green mist. Eris awkwardly cradled the squirming child. She looked to her brother, her voice shaking with uncertainty. She looked back down at the infant with equal parts kindness and terror in her eyes. With a shake of her head, Eris addressed the crowd with a stern scowl. Epilogue. Beacon Pines' coldest summer on record came and went without much fanfare. Folks shared what they had, and none were left wanting. The new school year was ushered in by the falling leaves of autumn. After everything Luca, Rollo, and Beck had been through, middle school was bearable. The chill of winter didn't seem to bother people much. They kindled a hope for a better future in their hearts. When spring arrived, farmers planted their crops with a sense of joy and optimism. And as the dawn of the first day of summer came again, its light slowly spread through the shallow valley. It crept over the town square, across the river, past the neglected welcome sign, and came to rest on a young boy sleeping at dawn, his mind at peace, knowing he is here for a reason. Over time, Eleanor began moving Walt's old things out of the closet and into storage. Eleanor had moved back into her bedroom, and now that she wasn't sneaking out late, she even slept there most nights.
LMAO, the fridge and sink have been on this whole time. Is Rolo still old?
When Perennial Harvest collapsed, most of the clipboards skipped town, but some stuck around and dedicated themselves to making things right.
I must still be missing charms.
Luca gently good for skim. her best to ignore the tears welling in her eyes. Closing her eyes, Miss Hatch took a deep, relaxing breath.
Yeah, who is this dog? Something sus here with this dog.
He playfully waggled an apple.
Beacon Pines 2.
Mrs. Fratelli glowed with a carefree smile. Mrs. Fratelli sighed with a zen-like calm. Luca squinted at the faded photo of memories of that. Mr. Nuncreed reached down and patted Luca's shoulder with an enormous hand. Mr. Wilder adjusted his monocle jokingly.
Yay, I completed it.
Over the school year, Kato and Bert had become close friends. It typically went on like this for quite some time. Luca peeked over Piper's shoulder. Laid stealthily inside a large volume of mathematics was the first issue of Hank Atomic. Mr. Nuncreed shook his head. With perennial harvest gone, the transportation tubes were left unused. Well, maybe not completely unused.
Huh, that's a real species of beetle. The Eastern Hercules beetle. Found in eastern United States.
I'd begun to lose hope of ever finding it. But then you came along. I don't know exactly how to thank you. It's hard to explain how much this means to me. It's funny, now that our time together is finally ending, I'm at a loss for words. Let's just watch the end together.
That was a good game. I'm still missing something though. I'm missing the charm crooked. If I go back here, I can get the last charm.
Luca drew himself up and decided to take the only option they had left. Flight. He squinted down the... He looked up with surprise. Luca and the branch after what that was the boys in fact. Chap sign. They this with E. Let's keep Luca pull. The boys stared. Luca, with a resigned. Luca wins. Looking down. The crunching of he looked. Luca peered upward at the darkening sky. He let up faintly, seeing. Luca allowed himself to collapse next to it. The boys, if not as it was. Iggy motioned. Iggy shrugged. Iggy. He wiped his. Luca gave. Iggy cleared his. Iggy. Lucas. That's all Iggy's. The house smelled of warm bread. He looked at his mother. A voice by Luca to the doppelganger. The figure it's a maid. Not that you don't remember. Lucas. The doppelganger. The day Luca turned. That's not the doppelganger. Everything. Well, let me show you. The world. Luca was the doppelganger. He grabbed Luca. It was his. Do you remember? Luca gave. He could see. Damn it, Walt. She was his father's. There's a. I won't turn. Luca's mother. Walt. What's right. I could never. Eleanor Ray. Spare. What about Luca Flynn? Walt turned. Luca with tears. Mom. Walt dropped. Nothing but. Luca placed. It's down. Walt gently. Listen to me. I'll be back. Luca had promise. Walt stood up with a wink. A figure approached soundlessly from the foggy snowfall.
We still don't know who this person is.
From whether it was Iggy felt it. Luca looked. The figure. When it came to. Iggy huffed. Now to begin. shark. Realizing Luca and Nat took a deep. Nat exhales. For Luca and until they cold. Nat. Luca began to look. He looked his eye with a sudden. He sprinted as Iggy turned. Chapters. The Nat he'd given as Lucas Rolo said Mr. The clip. It all seemed to point to perennial harvest. But right now, Lucas stopped the tree. He dropped his numb hand. A dry. There was no. Iggy found. Suddenly. He bent down to. Lucas stuttered. Iggy gave. Luca wiped. Iggy flipped. Iggy and Iggy Darky emerged. Luca. Iggy stuck. Iggy tried.
Why there's a jump mechanic when I don't ever need to use it. That's what I needed.
This is a story about struggle. Luca could hear. He felt his hand. He yanked. Let Lucas. He heard with the muff. Luca was. He. Chapter everything. The next. Only this.
Wait, I'm missing one more, I think.
Luca wrapped. Hey, you Luca looked up at Rollo nearly.
Ah, there's the last one.
While it didn't turn the rate, it did at least boost the signal enough to overhear truckers one town over. Luca tied a bed. If all you have is a hammer. Luca tied a small magnet to the line, fishing with the law of attraction.
Thank you for the follow, Janet Holland. Oh, I see your whisper, Janet Holland, thank you. Yay, I think I have all the achievements now. I think I'ma end now. I completed the game and got all achievements. Pretty good game. I'ma raid someone who I see is live playing Gartic Phone. Actually, I'll raid user friendly again.